Neurotic Literature by James Lark. This story: What's Ben most anxious about today? When Evelyn saw the video, she froze. She just stood there, statue-like, right in the middle of making her gin and tonic. It is a reflection of the strength of feeling it provoked that she did not resume mixing the drink for a good 3.5 minutes. She let the video run its full duration, staring at the screen of her tablet. Even when it finished, her eyes remained fixed on the blank screen, the tick-tick-tick of her kitchen clock marking the processing time, until she was able to relax her face sufficiently to form words. Those words, when they eventually arrived, were, "Ah, shit!" After which statement, articulated with the abrasive stridency for which her statements were renowned, she proceeded with the pouring of gin that had been interrupted, paused, and added, "The absolute fucking shit!" Then she finished making her gin and tonic, and drank it in a single gulp. David watched the video without any visible emotion, settling back in his ergonomic executive chair with his head at the slightest angle, the only thing that hinted at the thoughts going on behind the inscrutable expression. His eyes remained fixed on the 4K Ultra HD 31.5-inch monitor that he had insisted his pay grade merited until the video ended. Then he leaned forward and closed the window on the screen with a single click of the mouse. He sighed and lifted his phone. "Oh, still there, Nicky?" he asked. "You ought to have gone by now." A pause, then, "Yes, I know the feeling." He sighed again. "Not that I want to add to the pile of work, but would you mind drafting an email for me? No, it needn't go out till the morning, but while it's fresh in my mind, perhaps you'd take a few notes." Indigo didn't watch the whole thing. She squinted at her phone in disbelief, pressing her noise-cancelling earpods as far as they would go into her auditory canal, though they remained mostly ineffectual against the throbbing beat around her. Her face contorted into a series of grimaces, disbelief giving way to growing irritation, until she whipped her earpods out in annoyance and shoved her phone angrily back into her bag. She made a beeline for the bar, pushing through the heaving, sweating, hedonistic throng until she was close enough to tug the jacket of an unkempt, scrawny man who was waiting to be served. He glanced down and grinned as he recognised her distinctively patterned nails. "Nearly there," he said. "Forget the drink," she snapped. "You want to sleep with me?" The scrawny man waved away the bartender who had appeared and turned his full attention to Indigo. "Is that a question? A statement? An offer?" "It's all three," said Indigo coldly. "Right," said the man, then with greater interest, "right," as he pushed his way back through the crowd away from the bar. "I'll get my coat." Without enthusiasm, Indigo followed. Jenny and Thomas watched the video on their smart television, sad looks on their faces, Jenny occasionally glancing at her husband as if for reassurance, but finding none in his glazed, fixed features. Jenny made the occasional noise, something between a groan and an exclamation, though she did tend to do this whatever they were watching on television, so it shouldn't be assumed that her lament was directed at what they were viewing, or even that it was a lament at all. When it ended, Thomas got to his feet a little unsteadily and suggested that it was probably time to make their Horlicks. As he left the room with small, shaky steps, Jenny took a tissue from the box and wiped her eyes, though again, this shouldn't be taken as an expression of emotion, since her eyes had a tendency to water towards the end of the day. Neither Jenny nor Thomas mentioned what they had seen, as they ponderously prepared themselves for bed. Ben did not begin to wonder if the video might have been an error of judgment until at least halfway through the next morning. He had gone to bed brimming with an artificial sense of confidence, the buoyancy that descends upon someone who is a little bit drunk and who has done something uncharacteristically bold with, they imagine, considerable wit and style. He woke up still full of it, smiling to himself as he went through his morning ablutions, chuckling a little as he ate his breakfast, not only because the action he had taken was a suitably clever response to everything, but also because, and this really was the point of the thing, he had unburdened himself of a great many vexations and, as people often point out, it really does help to get things off your chest. He was making his third cup of tea when doubt languidly drifted across his mind, a faint cloud that would soon be joined by more dramatic and threatening shadows. His mistake had been to stop thinking about the video from his own perspective, from which view it was absolutely magnificent, and to ask himself the question, albeit unconsciously, what will they make of it? It was clear that it was intended as a joke, he reassured himself. That was obvious. He wouldn't have made such a public statement, wouldn't have shared it so brazenly and proudly, if it was meant as anything more than that. He expected they were having a good laugh. It was clear from the tone that he had been joking, wasn't it? Well, sort of joking. That was the problem with anything you put on the internet. It was so difficult to control what people would infer. A wave of paranoia swept over him, and he swiftly checked his phone. No, there were no messages of reproof, no emails vilifying him. He experienced a pang of disappointment. No messages at all. Of hilarity, of merriment. No, you've managed to say what we're all thinking in a truly witty and original way, which he had slightly assumed would be forthcoming by now. But perhaps nobody had seen it at all. Or nobody thought it was worth commenting on. That was probably it. It was hardly the most significant contribution to an internet absolutely stuffed full of witty original content. In fact, there was nothing very original about being original on the internet. Not these days. Even so, he thought Indigo might have said something. Perhaps it was too subtle, or she hadn't really seen it, though he had sent it to her, hadn't he? He checked his phone. Yes, he had messaged her the link, and the little tick next to the message showed that it had been received and opened. Where Indigo was concerned, the video had felt a little bit personal, in a way that she should have found sweet. Or possibly annoying. He wasn't sure whether he'd get that shy grin or the roll of the eyes, but either way it was a result, and he found both options equally adorable. But nothing at all? That was disappointing. Though it was likely she'd been in one of her ghastly clubs, so maybe she couldn't watch it when he sent her the link because everything was too noisy, and she was probably still in bed. Evelyn liked internet videos, though. Odd that she hadn't commented or shared it around on social media. She was normally really on top of that kind of thing. Or had she... She couldn't have taken it personally, could she? No, come on. This was her language, the language of the internet, the language of drama. She'd love it. If she had seen it, which evidently she hadn't. He probably overestimated his own reach, his own relevance. Again, disappointing, but kind of a relief. Yes, he had come down from his brief high, but at least he could be sure there would be no consequences. His stomach lurched. Might there be consequences? What if David took it seriously, failed to see the funny side? But David knew him better than that. Sure, David was technically his boss, but he was his friend first and foremost. But what if... Ben pulled himself together. This was ridiculous. He was working himself up into an absurd state over a silly little video that he had clearly circulated as a joke and which almost certainly nobody had seen. Even the people to whom he had deliberately sent it. All this unnecessary worry was the anxiety he had referred to in the video in the first place. The point of the video had been to let go of it, not add to it. He was still jittery and decided that what he needed was a nice warm bath. He was on the edge, working too hard. This worrying about little things needed to stop. He needed to get some proper rest. As he sank into the bath, the warm bubbles encircling him like a hug, he felt his apprehensions dissipate. He closed his eyes and breathed in slowly, allowing the knot of tension to dissolve in the comforting water. Then he sat up and leaned out, scrabbling around with wet hands in the pile of clothes on the floor, hunting for his phone. It was worth watching the video, just once, in the sober light of day. His own face loomed onto the screen, looking buoyant and, he had to admit, very obviously drunk. "Welcome," his inebriated voice echoed around the bathtub, "to this week's edition of What's Ben Most Anxious About Today?" He had found a stock piece of musical punctuation that last night had felt like actual comedy genius, but which now sounded like the most uninspired parody cliché in the book. "Let me run the options by you." His grotesque, grinning image slurred. "Could it be number 1, his increasingly strained relationship with the artistic director of the Chenley Amateur Theatre Society, a highly strung and heavily made-up lady with whom he has the misfortune to be co-directing a production of Cats, not because either of them like it or have the first clue about felines or choreography, but because it seemed like a clever play on the Society's acronym, and who He closed his eyes and shivered, his bath no longer feeling warm or comforting, and listened on to the stream of consciousness that had poured out of him only 12 hours earlier. Where he had remembered one wry punchline following hot on the heels of the next, there was only anger. What he had thought was side-splitting patter was nothing more than an embittered rant. When the thing ended, he watched it once more to be sure, then pondered the possibility of sliding into the bath and letting himself drown. "Oh, God," he whimpered out loud, "I sent that to my parents." Option 3 on Ben's list of possible things he was most anxious about opened the door to him with an unimpressed look on her face. "Saw your video," Indigo told him. "You did?" He laughed nervously. "I assumed you wouldn't have noticed it. You sent it to me." "But even so," Ben laughed again, "it seemed the sort of thing nobody would bother watching." "Then you obviously haven't checked the number of views it's had." In fact, Ben had checked the number of views immediately after watching the video for the second time, optimistically clinging to the hope that perhaps nobody had seen it at all, and that he could discreetly delete it and pretend it had never happened. But a lot of people had watched it. The number of views seemed to be increasing, alarmingly rapidly. Clearly, a drunken rant was exactly the kind of clickbait people were looking for on a Saturday morning. He had also been curious about, if not much reassured by, the number of comments it was getting. Most of them vacuous expressions of amusement, but what was interesting was the number of people who had used the comments section to vote on which thing was making him the most anxious. He hadn't actually left any system for voters to use, because that hadn't been the point, but evidently people wanted to vote all the same. He would have to do a count at some point and see whether he agreed with the result. As well as the comments, there was a new email waiting in his inbox, but that was something he had decided to ignore for the moment. "So the video," said Indigo once they were sitting in her kitchen with mugs of tea. "Oh, that," he said dismissively. He had been hoping to get away with not mentioning it at all. Who hasn't done embarrassing things when they're drunk? Pretending they never happened is one of the ways that society is able to continue functioning. "I expect you thought it was funny." "Not really," Ben said. "What, you meant it then?" No, not exactly. It was definitely tongue-in-cheek, but look, either you meant it or you didn't," she said with the ruthless logic that was so much part of her personality. "Which bit?" he asked evasively. "All of it," she said. "The stuff about being anxious about our relationship because you weren't sure where you stood with me." "Oh, that," he said, and forced another laugh, though that was getting audibly less effective each time he tried it. "That's all relationships, isn't it?" "No." She looked hard at him. "No, it isn't." "Oh, my mistake." He sipped his tea. It was supposed to be a wry comment on the nature of relationships, but I guess I misjudged it." "And the bit about worrying that you'd feel trapped in a marriage?" "Oh, definitely a wry comment," Ben reassured her. "Bit of a cliché, really, that joke. Sort of went past its sell-by date after 4 weddings and a funeral." "What about not wanting to propose to me as you weren't sure what I'd say? Was that one of your hilarious wry points too?" Not really, no." So was I supposed to take it as a sideways proposal? Indigo demanded. Because since you made such a point of sending it to me, that's sure as hell what it felt like. Not exactly, said Ben, cautiously. Maybe testing the waters a bit, I suppose. I see. They sipped their tea in silence, Ben racking his brains for other things to talk about, because he shouldn't let up this opportunity to change the subject. He had been wondering about taking Indigo out somewhere, maybe the cinema, but they always went to the cinema on a Saturday afternoon, so perhaps a museum, just for a change. There's an exhibition on, he began. That's how I took it, anyway, said Indigo, as an especially cowardly proposal of marriage without actually proposing. Proposing a proposal. Putting the ball in my court so you didn't have to go to any effort yourself. That's definitely how it seemed to me. Oh, sorry. I was clubbing with Raph, she said, and this message arrives. Oh. Ben couldn't quite disguise the note of disapproval in his voice. He didn't like Raph, an untidy hanger-on, part of a world he wanted nothing at all to do with. This message that, in spite of all the attempts to disguise it as something else, is a not-quite proposal, or at least the threat of one. And you're right about marriage. Your wry satirical point about him making people feel trapped is spot on. That's how I would feel, trapped. That's how I felt last night. Your message, it made me feel trapped. Oh, look, I'm really sorry, said Ben. Honestly, I was drunk and... we never have to talk about it again. Pretend it never happened. I'm not sure I can, said Indigo, because when I feel trapped, I tend to react. And I reacted last night. I reacted by... I did something. Ben looked up just in time to see her swiftly wipe away a tear that had rolled down her cheek. His heart sank. I did something you're not going to like, she admitted. By the time he arrived at the theatre, he had, for reasons that were frankly understandable, had quite a bit to drink. Evelyn was waiting for him. Oh, so you've decided to show your face, have you? That is, what I thought we agreed, Ben said. At the moment he was looking at two Evelyns, who were swimming in angry circles in front of him, but if he stood very still and tried to focus on one of the Evelyns, then probably neither of them would notice he was drunk. You thought we agreed that? Funny, because I heard that I never agree on anything. Oh, In any case, I'm surprised you thought it was worth coming to audition people for a show that apparently neither of us think is worth doing except as a clever play on the Society's acronym. Oh, that, Ben said, forgetting which of the Evelyns he was supposed to be focusing on, and directing his apologetic laugh to the wall behind her instead. What's the point in your being here anyway, when I'm such a blinkered control freak? Oh, sorry, am I being highly strung? Either way, I trust I'm not too heavily made up for your tastes, or should I go home and put on something less feminine? No. Ben decided he probably needed to sit down and looked around desperately for a chair. Sorry, am I boring you? I haven't even started banging on about musicals nobody has ever heard of yet. Ben decided he wasn't going to make it to the chair, so he sat down on the floor. Evelyn stared at him. Ben, are you drunk? He got home 20 minutes later, feeling pretty rubbish about everything, and, devoid of a single other thing from which to derive comfort, he went to the video again and scrolled down the growing list of comments. At least some viewers had found it entertaining, even if they were complete strangers. He was irritated that several commentators seemed to find him amusing simply because of who he was. One of them used the phrase, quaint parody of a typically uptight Brit. But overwhelmingly the comments were enthusiastic, in some cases sympathetic. I so identify with all this anxiety, lols! And above all, buzzing with eager anticipation for the answer to the question he had posed. What was it that was making him most anxious? A great many people clearly couldn't wait to find out. He had spent his day with individuals who, for one reason or another, did not deserve his time. Here, however, was a growing demographic who, he felt, merited an answer. Welcome back. We've seen exciting developments since yesterday's video, and the anxiety-ometer is truly off the scale, so I can promise some hotly contested options battling to screw over my general well-being as thoroughly as possible. But first, the votes are in. Now it's time to reveal what was causing me the most anxiety last time. He spent longer on the post-production, pepping up the whole video with vulgar game show music because he rationalised that if naff cliché was the style, he might as well commit to it. He had mixed in cheesy sound effects with abandon. The comedy was in making it obvious, so he fearlessly set out to land everything squarely on the nose. Let's recap. Was it the job? Was it the girlfriend? Was it the parents? Or was it the amateur production of Cats, which is the thing that certainly seems to have received the most votes? Not that I've counted, it's just for fun after all, but that's the one that really caught the public imagination. And why not? What could be more anxiety-inducing than a performance of Cats, after all? He had laughed in Evelyn's face when she had given him the sack. "You can't give me the sack, you silly woman, you don't employ me." Looking back even a few hours later, he could barely comprehend the extent to which that amateur setup had been preying on his mind. How the hell had they been worth it? And why hadn't he realised the solution was as simple as no longer being part of it? It was anxiety-inducing too. You may not understand that, though obviously a lot of you do. But my God, the hours, the days I wasted worrying about the tiny-minded politics of a frankly shambolic group of exhibitionists desperate to squeeze into leotards and leap around in front of an audience. It's madness, isn't it? He knew that, could he be bothered, he could challenge his dismissal. The trust deed of the Chenley Amateur Theatre Society had quite strict rules about the hiring of volunteers. He knew this, having done a dreadful 3-year stint as a trustee, and, as he had loudly pointed out to Evelyn and the small crowd that had gathered to watch the confrontation, if drunkenness were grounds for discharge, then she was going to have to replace half the cast. But what he realised, as he walked out of the theatre, was that he never wanted to go back. He was free from an obligation which, how had he not realised this, was far more of a burden than the artistic result could ever justify. So, whilst I'm ashamed to admit that my quality of life was being so badly impacted for such a laughable cause, Cats was not ultimately the thing causing me the most anxiety. Well done to everyone who guessed what that was. You've shown great insight here. And it says it all, that the things I ought to be worrying about, my relationship, my friendships, my parents, for goodness sake, my parents, who it turns out care so little that even a rambling drunken video about their indifference didn't provoke any response, those things, those important things, were mere niggles compared to my job. This announcement was accompanied by a big on-screen caption for good measure. Bishop Lexington University. You probably haven't heard of it, but like any minor British educational establishment, it has its fair share of entitled students, small-minded academics and jobsworths. Barely worth a thought, the lot of them. Yet it was that, set up as laughable in all honesty as an amateur production of Cats, that which occupied my every thought, prevented me from enjoying anything at all because of the gnawing clutch it had on my entire life. That was the thing keeping me awake at night and a skittish wreck by day. The definition of a toxic workplace. Watching it back, he was uncertain about this bit. He had meant to move on from the announcement pretty swiftly, but instead he had let the alcohol keep talking and gone off on a rant. It almost felt a bit preachy. But given that the screed was delivered without pause for breath, he struggled to find any obvious places to make cuts, and once he was into the editing process, he couldn't be bothered to go back and re-record it. Anyway, it was authentic and honest, and that's what viewers wanted, wasn't it? And paying me a salary small enough that it's a drop in the ocean to them, but big enough that you grow dependent on it so you're forced to stay in line because they've convinced you that you can't manage without the money. Then they own you, and they can exploit you and humiliate you, and you won't leave because you're in their pocket. That's how the system works. And here's the thing, since saying it out loud, I've realised how insignificant it all is. I've realised that nothing, no amount of money or security is worth having your life pulled around like that. I don't need them. I mean, you'll be unsurprised to hear that my boss was one of the first people to react to my video. I've got an email from him sitting in my inbox. Hey, I haven't even looked at it. This was not strictly true. Ben had finally, reluctantly, opened the email and glanced down it just to check that there wasn't anything unexpected in there. There wasn't, and since he hadn't bothered to read it properly, less still to respond, he felt a little dramatic license was permissible. I know what the email will say, that I've stepped on a line, that I'm bound by a code of conduct, that I didn't behave in a professional, yada yada, yawn yawn, triple yawn. You know what? I don't care, because the salary is literally the only control they have over you. Once you realise that, they're powerless, because you can walk away. What are they going to do? Once you know that the money isn't worth it, it's like Thingy in that film with Thingy. You know, for my will is as strong as yours and you have no power over me, something like that. So, yeah, the job took the top spot last time, but not anymore. I'm done with it. And that means it's anyone's guess what's highest on my list of anxieties today. Ben had found a website that did free polls, and given the number of informal votes his first video had earned, he thought it best to give the whole game a more organised feel. The bar graphs breaking down how people voted would look great on his next video. So at this point he was flashing up a link for voting, as the music ramped up to mark the end of his introduction. That's right, there's still everything to play for as you prepare to engage with the shittiest details of my shitty, troubled life in this round of What's Ben Most Anxious About Today? On Sunday morning, Ben lay in bed checking his phone, gratified to see that his new video had already been seen by over 10,000 people. Many had once again cast their votes on the sources of greatest anxiety, and comments indicated that they were enthusiastic about the prospect of a follow-up. He was less excited to see that David had sent him a second email, which he reluctantly decided would cause more anxiety left unread, so with a palpable sense of unease, he opened it. Unlike the first one, it had evidently been written not in Nicky's carefully chosen words, but by David himself, apparently that very morning and possibly in rather a hurry. It even contained some misspellings and dubious grammar, which Ben thought was a bit off for the chair of an English faculty, even one writing in haste. Dear Ben, I sent a perfectly reasonable and polite email in response to your first video and had hoped, as requested in that same email, that we might have an opportunity to discuss the things that I had written. The unorthodox spelling of opportunity employed by the chair of the Bishop Lexington English Faculty Board incorporated a second I after the second T. Instead of which, I discover now that another video has now been uploaded. That's at least one too many nows, Ben thought, and that you even discuss my email on said video, which I think is out of order before you even had the decency to discuss it with me. Discuss, muttered Ben. What the fuck does that even mean? I suggest that we meet in my office bang on 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, and for crying out loud, can you abstain from making any more video content until we have had a chance to talk further? I would appreciate a response to this as a matter of urgency. I bet you would, said Ben, deleting the email. It evaporated as a concern within minutes. In that sense, Ben's video rant had been true. His job really had stopped meaning all that much to him, either as an anxiety or as a mounting problem of his own making. The worst they could do was fire him, and he found himself remarkably unbothered by the possibility. The thing weighing on his mind was the thing that he had spent so much of yesterday's video talking about. In fact, he had not even realised what was causing him the most anxiety until he had started talking. Indigo had not broken up with him, exactly. The way she had left the status of their relationship was shrouded in ambiguity, insofar as she had just left, without saying anything at all, having dropped her bombshell. So she definitely hadn't ended their relationship. Not in so many words. In any case, he thought angrily, it should have been him breaking up with her. After all, he was the one she had cheated on. He would have broken up with her too, if she hadn't buggered off so quickly. He had been left standing there uselessly as she made her inconclusive escape, so stunned he was by her confession, so tongue-tied in the face of such a shattering blow. In the 24 hours since, he had fantasized imaginatively about what he should have said to her. How he should have gone after her and made it precisely, surgically clear how her betrayal had made him feel before severing all ties to her with dramatic finality. How he should have at least attempted to hurt her, even if it was a fraction of the hurt he had to repay. This had been the focal point of a substantial part of his second video. But that morning he had been surprised to find the energy of his hatred and his desire for revenge all but vanished. Even the thought of Indigo having sex with Raph, which a day earlier had repeatedly popped unbidden into his raging mind with visceral intensity, had lost its power. It still upset him, sure, but it no longer got under his skin. What did it really matter, anyway? It was a moment, a mistake, a mere particle of grief next to the enormity of what he had lost, or at least might be about to lose. His overriding anxiety by that evening was that, by airing their dirty laundry for a second time, by making a tasteless joke out of her infidelity and simultaneously trumpeting his petty-minded desire for revenge, he had unwittingly put pay to any possibility of repairing the damage that had been done. She wasn't answering her phone or responding to his text messages, so he decided to communicate his remorse by making another video. "If you're running it as a quiz," said Indigo, "you need to make it less obvious what the answer is." "Oh, it's obvious, is it?" "Unless it's a cunning double bluff," she said. "In which case, kudos. You had me fooled." He stirred his chai latte with the inadequate wooden stick provided, trying to reunite the frothy milk stuck to the edges of the cup with the drink it belonged to. He glanced around restlessly. They were sitting in the corner of a noisy artisan coffee shop, too small to comfortably fit the crowding hipsters, young couples, and families with pushchairs. It felt a very public place to be having such a private conversation. But then, he was guilty of having made the conversation pretty darn public already. "So, what do you think the answer is, then?" He grinned pathetically and switched on his inane online presenter voice. "What's Ben most anxious about today?" She playfully hit him over the head with an unopened packet of crisps. "It's me, you dolt." "You think?" "Yes, I do, along with most of your bloody audience, if the online poll's anything to go by. Hardly surprising after all the time he spent banging on about it." He nodded and sipped his latte. He swallowed and said quietly, "Some of my bloody audience think I should have nothing to do with you ever again." "That's hardly surprising either, given the picture you've painted of me." He couldn't look at her. "And are you going to take their advice?" "Obviously not." "You should consider it. So many people telling you to give me the boot might have a point." It was a lot of people. Ben's eyes almost popped out of his head when he saw the numbers his third video had drawn. The initial response had been impressive, but he wasn't sure if it really constituted a high hit rate in this day and age. The hit rate he was achieving now left no doubt. Lots of them did want him to break up with Indigo too, especially since his heartfelt third video in which he had made his intensity of feeling clear. Most of these opinions had been blunt, along the lines of, "You can do so much better than that trash," and "dump the bitch, make the switch," though a few commentators had taken the time to write in more depth about how he might feel security in going back to her, but a toxic relationship would destroy him in the end. A few people had even offered rebound sex or meaningful long-term liaisons themselves. But they didn't know Indigo like he did. "If it helps," she said with a heavy sigh, "that would be my advice to you." He realised she was crying, in that gentle, silent way she did, her eyes wet and a faint tremor in her voice. "I don't deserve your trust, or you, to be honest, even if you weren't entirely blameless." "Do we have to talk about blame?" he asked, awkwardly. He wanted to reach out and hold her hand, but he wasn't sure where he stood with her at this moment. He wasn't even sure where the balance stood in terms of blame. The more he reflected, the more it felt like he had kinda asked for it. "So anyway," Indigo said, wiping her eyes with the back of her sleeve and adopting the matter-of-fact delivery that she seemed able to slip into with the same ease as pulling on a jumper, "it sounded as though you're willing to move on from what happened." "I am." Ben threw caution to the wind and grasped her hand in both of his, clutching at it as romantically as he dared. He cradled her slender fingers, marvelling at their pale perfection, the detail in the colourful patterns on her fingernails which he used to think she stuck on until he realised that she painted them like that. "Where'd you get the time," he asked, to which she deadpanned, "You make time for things that are important," and wondered what he could do to keep hold of this impossible, beautiful, one-of-a-kind woman who was often enormously irritated by things that seemed to be what he ought to say or do. "I'm not saying it's going to be easy," he began, and she pulled her hand away with an impatient snort. "Don't give me that bullshit," she said. "Why shouldn't it be easy? If you want me as badly as you said in your video, it ought to be a bloody breeze to forgive and move on." I suppose. Well, do you want me that badly? Or was that shtick for your new fan base?" "Of course it wasn't." Bereft of her hand, he gripped his cup uneasily. "So you did mean it?" "Sorry." "What are you apologising for?" "Well, I realise now," he admitted, looking at the table while he spoke because he couldn't find the right words while her face was distracting him, "that if the first video made you feel trapped, then I should have stopped there, and that the last video especially, however much I meant it, you probably found it manipulative." He looked up and met her steely eyes. "Not at all," she said, unblinking. "What? No? No, I found it sincere." She allowed herself a half-smile. "I didn't think you were trying to manipulate me, consciously or otherwise. You were saying how you felt. And I wasn't answering my phone, was I?" "That's true. Even so, doing it so publicly—" "That was quite sexy, actually." "Oh." Ben's heart fluttered, an unexpected delight at feeling that he might have accidentally found the right track by doing what he had thought was the wrong thing. "You find my videos sexy? Well—" "The last one," she specified. "Not the first one, that was out of order. Being trapped, that's not sexy. Being needed—" She closed her hands around his, which was still clutching his cup, and gently stroked his fingers with the tips of her intricately patterned nails. "And being needed so publicly," she added, staring deep into his soul, and letting a meaningful smirk play around her lips. "That, in fact, makes me feel extremely horny." Ben hardly dared breathe, like a scientist on the verge of an unexpected but career-defining breakthrough. Indigo removed her hands and stood up abruptly. "Let's take the crisps with us, shall we?" she said, and before he knew what he was doing, he was stumbling to his feet to catch up with her. Later, they lay naked and entwined under the blanket on her sofa, Indigo flicking through film options on the TV, Ben too captivated by her softness and closeness to be able to think about watching anything but her. "You'll keep doing the videos?" she asked suddenly. "If this is what results from them, God, yes," he said. "But seriously," she insisted, "you're going to keep it going?" He closed his eyes and yawned. "Right now," he said, "I don't know that I've got anything left to talk about. What could I be anxious about when we're like this?" "I can give you something to feel anxious about," she said. "I'll sleep with Raph again if it helps." "That's not funny." "No, but you've created a brand. You should keep working on it." She had been joking about sleeping with Raph, obviously, but there was suddenly a knot in his stomach that hadn't been there before. She had been joking, hadn't she? Of course she had, but she had prodded an anxiety that he hadn't realised was still there. Because if she could sleep with someone as unappealing, as downright dull as a man who virtually followed her around with his mouth open in lustful desire, then who was to say she wouldn't do it again? Or with someone else, anyone else? He held her a little more tightly. He would have to make sure that she never had reason to. He would have to work all the harder to be the person, the partner, the lover that she needed him to be. She wriggled to free herself from him, and he reluctantly let her sit up. "I could help," she said, and he agreed because that seemed to be what she needed at that moment. Sunday lunch with the parents looked set to be even more the joyless filial obligation than usual, since Ben was now decisively resentful about the affront represented by their complete lack of acknowledgement of his videos. They had continued to feature in his list of anxieties, and he had continued to forward every video to them. Their refusal to respond, even to tell him to stop sending them the link, was more than passive-aggressive. It was a full-on slap in the face by omission. It was their way of telling him, with the loudest possible silence, that they couldn't care less. Well, he wasn't going to bring it up. That would be playing into their hands, an admission that they had got to him. He was going to act as if everything was normal, turn up for bloody lunch on the first Sunday of the month as per the usual arrangement, and weather the awkward hush that was par for the course anyway. He was listlessly chewing a mouthful of overcooked pork when his father broke it. "We have been voting in your video poll, thing." Ben stopped chewing, wondering if he had misheard. Or was it a trick, a way of forcing his hand? He swallowed, which took some effort as his mouth was suddenly completely dry. "Oh?" he croaked. "I don't know if that's what it's called, the video voting thing." Ben stared at his father suspiciously. "Anyway, Thomas continued, with a gruff attempt at a chuckle. "Very entertaining." He frowned. "A little bit sad, too. But no, it's enterprising. You speak very fluently." "You've been voting?" Ben echoed. "Both of you?" Thomas nodded. "Your mother thinks we're doing it wrong, though. She thinks we're voting for, the things making us the most anxious." "Oh, well, that's allowed, if that's how you want to play the game." Ben's mind was racing. They had been voting? His parents had actually been interacting with the videos? Why on earth hadn't they said something? "Your mother says perhaps that's not in the spirit of the game. Not at least if we were playing to win. She thinks perhaps the things that make you anxious are different to the things we worry about as your parents." "Oh." Ben smiled and waved his hand dismissively. "Look, all of the options are things making me anxious, so there are no wrong answers in a sense." He grinned feebly. Thomas and Jenny didn't seem to notice, staring at their plates as they continued to lift small forkfuls of food to their mouths and chew ponderously. Ben, so keen not to be the one to communicate moments ago, suddenly found the pause unbearable. So which are the things you've been voting for?" he asked. "You don't have to tell me," he hurriedly added. "I was just curious." "No, that's—" Thomas shook his head and dragged his eyes back up to look at his son. "That's all right. Your mother, she's most worried about the job situation." "Are you sure there's no possibility of going back?" Jenny interjected, her voice urgent and troubled. "To the university, I mean. You've done so many years there, it seems so... If you were to apologise or—" "I think it's unlikely they'd take me back even then," Ben guiltily admitted. "Or under any circumstances, to be honest." Which was very much the case, as David had made abundantly clear when he had eventually collared Ben after a lecture and all but dragged him into his office. Ben had faced immediate disciplinary action due to having brought the university into disrepute, as he had subsequently explained in none too flattering detail for his growing audience, an action which rather sealed the deal as far as the termination of his employment went. He was sure that the university, unlike the Chenley Amateur Theatre Society, had watertight grounds for dismissal. This was also causing him as much anxiety as his mother was expressing. At least, the lack of income was. The loss of the job itself was actually a source of great relief. He hadn't realised quite how much tension he had been holding, and since being released from his university responsibilities and any prospect of having to engage with its layers of administrative and diplomatic nonsense ever again, he felt lighter than he had for years. This, too, he had explained for his online audience, but he reiterated it for Jenny's benefit. "I really do think this could turn out to be a positive move for me," he said. "Honestly, I'll find another way to earn money, and one that won't break my spirit on a daily basis." Her face wrinkled into a slight and rather unconvincing smile. "Please tell us, if you don't mind telling us, that is. I worry about you. We both do." For a moment Ben thought he might choke up. He looked at his father, who was staring into the middle distance with one comforting hand on his wife's arm. "Sorry," he told them in an embarrassed mumble. "I didn't mean to burden you." Thomas cleared his throat. "It's nice to know what's happening with you." The thing... what I've been voting for. My big anxiety. He closed his eyes as if searching his brain for the right words, then opened them and looked straight at Ben. I would hate to think, he said, that we've been a cause of... that you would interpret our reactions as... any kind of... as indifference. I never thought that, Ben said, quickly and breathlessly. Honestly, I know you care. Look, we're not very good, Thomas continued, squeezing Jenny's arm, at talking. We didn't grow up with these videos and polls, didn't grow up saying how we felt. But that doesn't mean that we don't. Feel, that is. We care about you so much, Benedict, Jenny said softly. And since you're feeling anxious about so many things, what worries me the most is that we're one of them. You're not, Ben whispered. Honestly, It was silly, the things I said in the video. It's not... Thomas held up his hand, briefly authoritative, halting Ben's flow. We've let you down. It's maybe not our fault, but we have. And if you'll understand that it's not something we do very well, then we'd like to try to be better at talking, at telling you that we care. You don't need to do that, Ben said. Really, it's fine. Everything's fine. We're going to try, his father insisted, putting his free hand on his son's arm. And perhaps every so often you could tell us how you feel, Jenny added. You know, not on a video, but to our faces. Ben nodded wordlessly, blushing as hot, shameful tears ran freely down his cheeks. Thomas patted his arm. Now, any one for more? Jenny asked brightly. And you can tell us about this girl, Indigo, if you like. It sounds as though things are going better with her. Ben's list of anxieties had become something of a revolving door. His parents, his relationship, and all manner of associated insecurities followed hot on the heels of the pressures of his job in becoming concerns of the past, though, as if anxiety abhorred a vacuum, he found he was worrying with similar intensity about the dent the wing of his car had received while parked, the cause of the constipation he was experiencing increasingly frequently, or the ever-present issue of how he was going to earn money in his new circumstances. That last one, like the constipation, came and went, but could be cripplingly insistent, resulting in whole nights of insomnia and, especially when in a sleep-deprived flight of imaginative frenzy, sweaty-palmed apprehension that he would find himself starving, homeless, and unemployable. The solution unexpectedly presented itself in the form of the Newsome twins. Ben was, with Indigo's encouragement, formalising his brand assets, and while he was still refining the look of his website, its messaging tool received its first missive. "We are influencers," it said in block capitals. "We are content, we are thought, we are the future." Then, in an afterthought that used no capital letters at all, as if the supply had run out, "We love your content, can help you monetize it, let's talk." They talked, an online meeting scheduled for late evening, Ben assumed to account for the time difference. Kitty and T.J. Newsome were an odd-looking duo, barely recognisably human under layers of makeup, jewellery and dark glasses, though they had helpfully chosen contrasting colour schemes to differentiate themselves, Kitty modelling bold streaks of vivid purple and lime green, whilst her twin wore a deep red to match her lipstick. They told him they loved his content, albeit without registering any kind of emotion. They thought his content was original and relevant. It could be the next big thing. "We know that," said Indigo impatiently. "What are you offering?" "How many views do you get?" Kitty interrogated. Ben told them. "We'll decuple that in a week," TJ immediately said. "That means multiply it by 10, Kitty added. "I know what it means," Ben lied. "You'll know what it's worth, I expect." "Yes, sort of, yes, though something I've been wondering. How do you make money from content? "We'll worry about that side of things," Kitty said in her nonchalant transatlantic drawl. "You just provide the content." "Sure, but—" Ben laughed diffidently, keen to make it clear to the twins that, intimidatingly poised though they were, he wasn't completely green when it came to business. "How do I know that you're not ripping me off?" Or TJ grabbed a thick marker pen and scribbled a number on it, which she held up to the camera. "Did you get paid that kind of figure at Bishop Lexington University? Of course, if you think we're ripping you off," added Kitty. Ben gulped. "No, that looks fine," he said. "All right, but we need that figure in writing," Indigo interjected, and for the first time seemed to get a reaction from them, albeit one of mild irritation. "Also, why should we go with you? Don't think we haven't had other offers." "What, you want to see a CV?" scowled TJ. "God, you're so parochial." A link appeared on the screen. "There's our track record of cutting-edge content," Kitty snapped. "Take a look and get back to us if you're interested." "Well," said Ben, turning to Indigo with a smile, "that sounded positive." "Ish," Indigo said, sceptically. "I wasn't getting a whole load of enthusiasm from them." "They must be interested, though, to get in touch out of the blue like that." "Not quite out of the blue," Indigo admitted. "I gave them a link to your stuff." "You did?" Ben frowned. "I mean, great, but how many people have you been contacting then?" "Just them. We were at school together. I heard they'd exploded on the internet scene, so when I saw them in the pub a few days ago—" "In the pub? I thought they were calling us from Silicon Valley or something." "They live a couple of streets along, Ben." Ben couldn't help feeling deflated. "They weren't exactly acting like friends of yours." "God, they weren't friends," laughed Indigo. "They were absolute psychopaths. They both got expelled when they tried to create a hostage situation with the school incubator." She shook her head. "Those poor chickens." "So why did you give them my details?" complained Ben. "Because they'll do what they say." Indigo leaned towards him and rested her head lightly on his shoulder. "You've got a good thing, Ben, but we don't really know what we're doing. If they say they can monetize it, you'd better believe them. The Newsom twins always get what they want. You'll see." The Newsom twins got what they wanted, and Ben would look back at the next 3 months as the happiest of his life. He found enormous fulfillment in pouring his creative energy into What's Ben Most Anxious About Today, refining the format into an efficient 15 minutes that hit the web 3 times a week. His presentation became more polished, the jokes more sophisticated, and the look of the thing vastly more professional after a surprisingly inexpensive outlay on equipment. None of this was requested by the Newsom twins, who seemed happy with whatever he gave them, cryptically telling him the content is the content. But they were as good as their word when it came to the rewards, and Ben was untroubled by the mechanics of whatever it was making his output profitable, apart from occasionally having to perform some brief promotional material for advertisers. To his immense satisfaction, one of these was Bishop Lexington University. "We feel you were treated unfairly," explained Richard Normington, a former colleague who headed up the university's marketing strategy. Ben had always found Richard rather a loud, annoying presence, but he was a decent man on the whole, who was also blowing some of the university's marketing budget on wining and dining him, so Ben was prepared to let bygones be bygones. "We're not expecting you to come back. Seems like you have bigger fish to fry in any case." Nervous laughter. "But look, you know the university, so you can talk about it from a personal perspective, which is what really sells education these days." Richard topped up Ben's glass. "Besides which, any internet search for Bishop Lexington University brings your videos up first, so—" Richard sipped his own wine ruefully. "We've been advised that the best way forward is to have you say something nice about us, so that comes up instead of, what you said before." What his new income bought him was absolute freedom over how to organise his days and weeks. He had never imagined the possibility of a lifestyle that allowed for a leisurely wake-up, daily walks, and the chance to regain control over the books on his to-read shelf. He realised the thrill there was in listening to music without doing anything else, simply allowing himself to be immersed in the sound from his newly acquired audiophile-approved system. He rediscovered the simple pleasure of doing jigsaw puzzles. Not that he didn't have a social life, which, thanks to Indigo, was as lively as he wanted it to be, though since he was more of a few pints down the pub guy than an out-all-night dancing guy, it was a relief to find that the more he trusted her, the less necessary it felt to try to do everything together. There was the possibility of reacquainting himself with the Chenley Amateur Theatre Society, whose run of cats had sold out thanks to the publicity he had bought them, but only after a rehearsal process that those involved had found especially trying, due to Evelyn's blinkered control freakery, so the Trust were keen for Ben to come back and direct their next production if he wanted. He was undecided. He found that he was more and more inclined to spend the time he had with his parents of all people. He didn't know how much longer he would have them after all. That was a thing he had started to worry about, but if it resulted in him making better choices in how he prioritised his time, maybe that was a helpful worry. Not that all of his worries were positive ones, and he was still prone to overreacting. Nobody changes that quickly. But what's Ben most anxious about today was, in a funny way, his therapy. Even as he discussed his concern that the thing going on with his toenail might be a fungal infection, or that the supermarket might be out of Campari for the third week running, he was gaining a sense that these were not exactly insurmountable problems. In any case, it was clear from the comments on his videos that people were pleased to see his life going so well, and he was pleased to apply a more therapeutic angle to his observations.
You know,
He slurred at the end of one of his more alcohol-fueled episodes.
if I get myself any more sorted, my biggest anxiety will be that I won't have any anxieties left to put in these videos.
Kitty Newsom hit pause on the inebriated grin.
How does this make you feel, TJ?
Anxious, TJ responded, humorlessly. She scrolled down the comments under the video with a critical frown. Sure, there were plenty of positive interactions, the kind of emotional leeches who celebrate personal triumphs with smiley faces and thumbs up and exhortations for their idols to enjoy your happiness because you deserve it, hun. But there was an equal sprinkling of negativity, mostly to the effect that the videos weren't as good as they used to be. Most disturbing of all, the number of interactions was down. Well, said TJ, sniffing dispassionately, he was going to need a shot in the arm eventually. It was a rule of thumb, regardless of the medium. To survive, a format needs to reinvent, to evolve, to surprise. Whether a series of films, a sitcom, a podcast, or an internet sensation, that was logical. The need to continue to entertain existing viewers and entice new ones was a constant. Of course, there is a thin line between upping the ante and jumping the shark. But the Newsom twins weren't influencers, content, thought, and the future for no reason. Ben was taking a rather different view of the future. He was not blind to the finite possibilities of his concept, but he had come to see the videos more as a platform from which he could move on to greater things. He loved the production aspect, and had ideas for less formulaic content. He had also grown in confidence as a presenter, and thought there might be options for him either on the stage or in actual, real-life television. Having used What's Ben Most Anxious About Today to sort his life out, Ben was now most excited about tomorrow. New opportunities beckoned, and his online quiz show had run its course. He was thrilled by how calm he felt about it all. The idea of giving up his only source of income would have resulted in sleepless nights only months ago, whereas now it felt like the start of an adventure. But then, a few months ago, he would have been filled with anxiety about some inconsequential argument about Amdram and perpetual resentment about his parents. The fact that Indigo hadn't been in touch for a couple of days would have pushed his imagination into the wildest areas as he doubted her feelings or assumed that it was a de facto breakup, whereas now he was content to know that she was her own woman and he didn't need daily reassurance about her commitment. He had come a very long way in a very short time, he thought to himself as he answered a knock at the door. A youngster who often delivered in the area handed over a parcel. She seemed a little less cheerful than usual. "Are you okay?" Ben asked, adding, "You can always talk if there's something bothering you." She shrugged and shook her head, but that was fine. Sometimes it took people a bit of time to open up, and perhaps his offer would help her make the tiniest step in that direction. Yes, he thought as he returned to the living room, talking about problems really was the way to move forward. He opened the parcel and some sort of packing material fell onto the coffee table. Ben checked inside, but there was nothing else in it except a square of cardboard. He slid it out and stared at the message scrawled in thick pen, all block capitals. "Here's something to feel anxious about." What did that mean? Gingerly, he picked it up and unrolled the tissue paper, wrinkling his nose as it unravelled. Nestling in the centre was a pale, slender finger, raggedly severed below the knuckle, an unmistakable intricate pattern decorating the nail. In a state of shock, Ben fumbled for his phone. What had they done with her? Where was she? Who was the note even from? His fingers trembling, he dialed 999, but then checked the card for more details. The first thing the police would ask was whether there was anything else written on it, a demand for a ransom, instructions for delivery of money, or... But nothing. Just those words, "Here's something to feel anxious about." Desperately, he dropped the phone and rummaged in the parcel. There must be more information, anything. Otherwise, what was the point? People must realise he had money, and nobody went to the effort of kidnapping a person merely to taunt an internet celebrity. Or perhaps they did. Did they? The police would know. But he paused as he reached again for the phone, because what if he was supposed to wait? What if Indigo's finger was the first message of several? Contacting the police was the sort of thing that pissed off kidnappers, wasn't it? Equally, what if there were no instructions? What if this was it? But what if a call to the police was all it took to seal her fate? The finger was a warning. What if... Ben stood, frozen with indecision, his mouth dry. He was suddenly sweating profusely, unable to stop his hands from shaking. Damn his minor celebrity status! This would never have happened before. He didn't know how to handle this. He was out of his depth. Who could he call? Who would know? Maybe his parents might... His heart skipped a beat. If they knew about Indigo, whoever they were, there was every chance they knew about his parents. If they didn't, they might be tapping his phone calls. He couldn't risk involving anyone else. This was surely a matter for the police. Slowly, his trembling hand continued its journey to the floor to retrieve his phone. Slowly, he picked it up. Racked with fear, with indecision, with an inexplicable feeling of guilt and, above everything else, the weight of the most crippling anxiety he had ever experienced. His finger hovered hesitantly over the screen. Then he took a deep breath and began filming. You have been listening to
What's Ben Most Anxious About Today?
Written and performed by me, James Lark. If you have enjoyed, or at the very least been mildly diverted by this podcast,
You can support further episodes financially at ko-fi.com/neurotic literature.
don't forget to like and subscribe. Follow me on all the socials. You'll find me on Blue Sky as James Lark, and I'm on Instagram as Works of Lark. And
Most importantly of all, don't forget to vote. And while you're at it, tell everyone you know about it. The more people who get involved, the more fun it is. Tell your neighbour, tell your boss, tell your other work colleagues, tell your former teacher, tell your friends, tell your local Amdram society, tell your grandfather, your grandmother, assuming they're still alive. I mean, tell them anyway. Tell someone else's grandmother. Tell your local curry house. Phone up.